Picture this. You are standing at the entrance of a cave in what will one day be called South Africa. The year is somewhere around 1 million BC. There are no cities behind you, no roads, no language as you would recognize it. The sun is dropping fast, and the savanna outside is becoming dangerous. You step inside, and there, in the center of the cave, is fire. Controlled fire. Deliberately kept alive by creatures who look almost like you but are not quite you. And curling up from that fire, wrapping around every body huddled near it, filling every pair of lungs in that cave, is smoke. This is where the story starts. Not in a cigarette factory, not on a colonial tobacco plantation, not even in an ancient temple. It starts here, in this cave, with smoke that nobody chose to inhale but that entered human lungs every single night for hundreds of thousands of years before your species even had a name for itself. And what happened next? What that smoke did to those brains, what those brains did with what they felt, and how that chain of cause and effect eventually became one of the most universal human behaviors in recorded history, is one of the strangest and most revealing stories about what it means to be human that has ever been pieced together from bone and ash and ancient chemistry. You are not going to think about this topic the same way after today. In 2012, a team of researchers led by geologist Francesco Berna and archaeologist Paul Goldberg published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that quietly rewrote the timeline of human history. They had been excavating Wonderwerk Cave in the northern Cape of South Africa, a cave whose name means miracle in Afrikaans, and which turned out to deserve that name entirely. Digging through sediment layers 1.5 meters below the surface, they found what they were not expecting to find. Burnt bone fragments, ash, plant material that had been exposed to heat. The chemical signatures were unmistakable. Something had been burning inside that cave, in a controlled and sustained way, at least 1 million years ago. 1 million years ago. To put that in perspective, modern Homo sapiens have only existed for roughly 300,000 years. The creatures maintaining fire in Wonderwerk Cave were not your species. They were Homo erectus, an earlier version of the human line, a version without complex language, without symbolic art, without the cognitive architecture that makes you capable of watching a video about ancient history. And yet they had fire, they controlled it, they kept it alive inside an enclosed space, and every single night, without understanding why, without any concept of chemistry or neuroscience or addiction, they sat inside a cloud of smoke and breathed it in. This went on for a very long time, longer than you can genuinely picture. Researchers estimate that hominins were regularly exposed to smoke from controlled fires for somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million years before Homo sapiens appeared. That is not a generation or two of exposure. That is thousands of generations, tens of thousands. Long enough for the body and brain to not just adapt to smoke, but to begin responding to it in ways that went beyond simple tolerance. Here's what almost nobody discusses when this history comes up. Wood smoke is not chemically inert. It is not just particles and carbon. Burning plant matter releases hundreds of volatile organic compounds. Many of them are harmful, but a significant subset of them are neuroactive. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They interact, and be at with the same receptor systems that govern mood, pain, memory, and reward. Researcher Richard Wrangham of Harvard University spent decades arguing in works, including his book Catching Fire, that cooking with fire fundamentally reshaped human evolution, our teeth, our gut size, our brain capacity. But what Wrangham's framework does not fully address is the chemical environment that cooking fire created. Beta-carbolines, which are released by burning certain plants and organic matter, are monoamine oxidase inhibitors. That is the same class of compound used in modern antidepressants. Phenethylamine, also present in some plant smoke, stimulates the same pathways as amphetamine. Harmine and harmaline, found in the smoke of several plants that ancient humans would have burned, produce mild perceptual alterations and have been used as ritual substances across cultures for thousands of years. Your ancestors were not just sitting by a fire every night. They were sitting inside a low-level chemical environment that gently and repeatedly altered their brain chemistry. And the brain, which is above everything else a pattern recognition machine built by millions of years of natural selection, noticed. Something shifts when this particular smoke is in the air. Something feels different. Something feels, in some hard-to-name way, better. This is the moment. This is the pivot point in the entire history of human smoking. Not the invention of the pipe, not the cultivation of tobacco, not any deliberate decision by any person who understood what they were doing. Just a brain noticing a pattern and doing what brains are built to do with patterns that feel important. Remember this. Return to this. This matters. Neuroscientist Nora Volkow, who has served as director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse and whose research into the brain's dopamine reward system has transformed how science understands addiction, has demonstrated that the brain does not evaluate the source of relief. It only records the relief. The same neural circuitry that tells you to return to a water source that kept you alive yesterday tells you to return to a plant that made you feel better when it burned. There is no moral judgment in this circuitry. There is only signal. And for hundreds of thousands of years, that signal was being written into human neurology every single night around a fire. Now jump forward, stay in Africa, but move the clock to roughly 70,000 years ago. At the site of Wonderwerk Cave, on the southern tip of South Africa, archaeologists including Christopher Henshelwood have uncovered evidence of early modern humans engaging in complex symbolic behavior. Ochre engravings, shell beads, abstract patterns. These are people who think, who create meaning, who communicate through symbols. And it is around this period and in this region that the evidence for deliberate plant use begins to sharpen. The San people of southern Africa, whose genetic lineage, according to population geneticist Sarah Tishkoff's landmark 2009 study published in Science, places them among the oldest continuous human populations on Earth, practice healing rituals that involve the deliberate inhalation of smoke from specific plants to induce altered states. Researcher David Lewis Williams spent decades documenting these practices and analyzing the sandrock art that depicts them, publishing his findings in The Mind in the Cave and related works. His argument, supported by neuroimaging research conducted on subjects in similar trance states, is that the imagery covering ancient cave walls across southern Africa, the therianthropes, the geometric patterns, the figures that seem to float, directly depicts the visual experiences of a brain under the influence of psychoactive smoke. These images are not decoration, they are documentation, and some of them are between 20 and 30,000 years old. What Lewis Williams identified is something that changes how you read this entire history. The smoke was not just a side effect of fire for these cultures. The smoke was the point. The altered state that the smoke produced was understood, over generations of accumulated knowledge, to be a doorway, a technology of consciousness, something that allowed the human mind to access experiences it could not access through ordinary waking awareness. Healing, visions, contact with forces beyond the visible world. The specific beliefs varied from culture to culture, but the mechanism, burning a plant, breathing the result, crossing into a different state of mind, appears in cultures separated by oceans and tens of thousands of years, which means it was not borrowed. It was discovered, independently, over and over again, because it worked. Now cross the Atlantic. Go to the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, one of the driest environments on Earth, where the preservation of organic material is extraordinary. In the 1990s, archaeologists excavating burial sites in this region found leather pouches buried alongside human remains. Inside the pouches were snuffing tubes made from bone, small wooden trays for preparing plant material, and residue. Chemical analysis confirmed the presence of bufotenine and dimethyltryptamine, DMT, derived from the vilca tree, a plant native to the Andean foothills. The burials dated to approximately 3,000 years ago, but the sophistication of the tools, the elegant engineering of the snuffing tubes, the precision of the tray design, the specificity of the plant selection told researchers something important. This was not a new discovery. This was a refined practice, something that had been passed down through generations, improved upon, formalized into ritual. Then in 2021, archaeologist Jose Capriles and his team published findings from Cueva del Chileno, a cave in the Bolivian highlands that had been sealed for roughly 1,000 years. Inside a pouch made from fox snout, they found residue from at least 5 distinct psychoactive plants: cocaine from coca leaves, bufotenine and DMT from vilca seeds, harmine from a plant in the Banisteriopsis family, and traces of a 5th compound still being identified. This was not a single herb being burned for simple relief. This was a pharmacological system. Someone in the ancient Andes understood, with a precision that rivals modern pharmacology in its sophistication, how to combine plants to amplify and extend altered states. You do not arrive at a 5-plant psychoactive combination without centuries, probably millennia, of accumulated experimentation and knowledge behind you. Move now to Central Asia, to the burial mounds of the Eurasian steppes, the vast grasslands stretching from the Black Sea to Mongolia, home to the ancient Scythian tribes. Around 2,500 years ago, the Greek historian Herodotus traveled among the Scythians and documented something he personally witnessed that he found so extraordinary he described it in careful detail. After burying their dead, the Scythians would construct small tent-like structures by stretching thick wool felt over wooden poles. Inside, they placed a dish of red-hot stones. Then they threw cannabis seeds onto the stones. The smoke that rose, Herodotus wrote, was so powerful that no Greek steam bath could compare. And the Scythians inside the tent, he noted, cried out with pleasure. For centuries, historians treated this as exotic reportage from a man known for embellishment. Then archaeologists began excavating the Kurgan burial mounds of the steppes, and they found exactly what Herodotus described: braziers, burnt cannabis seeds, felt-lined enclosures. The behavior he had documented as foreign spectacle was, in fact, already an established cultural institution when he observed it, one with archaeological roots stretching back before his time. In 2019, a team led by researcher Yimin Yang published analysis in Science Advances of wooden braziers found at the Zhirzankal Cemetery in western China, dated to roughly 2,500 years ago. The chemical residue confirmed THC, the primary psychoactive compound in cannabis. But what the researchers noted was that the cannabis being burned had significantly higher THC content than wild cannabis native to the region. Someone was selecting for potency. Someone was, in effect, cultivating a stronger product for deliberate use. This was not accidental exposure to a burning weed. This was expertise applied to an ancient practice. Move west to Spain. In 2020, researcher Marta Cintas Pena led a team analyzing sediment layers at the Valencina de la Concepción site, a massive Copper Age settlement near Seville dating to approximately 5,000 years ago. Inside structures that archaeological context identified as ceremonial spaces, they found chemical residue indicating the deliberate burning of plants in the papaver family. That is the opium poppy, 5,000 years ago, in what is now southern Spain, being burned in ritual contexts. The finding was significant not just for its age, but for its geography. Opium use had been well documented in the ancient Near East and Egypt. Finding evidence of ceremonial opium burning this far west this early suggested something that archaeologist Andrew Sherratt had been arguing for decades. The human demand for altered states through plant smoke was not a regional behavior. It was a species-wide behavior that emerged repeatedly, independently, in every corner of the world where humans settled. Sherratt's contribution to this history deserves a moment. A British archaeologist who spent much of his career at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, Sherratt proposed something that was controversial when he first published it and is now gaining increasing acceptance. He argued that before grain, before metal tools, before textiles became significant trade commodities, humans were trading psychoactive plants, the movement of cannabis across Central Asian trade routes, of opium poppy across the Mediterranean and Near East, of coca and tobacco across the Americas. These were not accidental byproducts of human migration. They were deliberate trade in substances that people specifically sought out and were willing to travel for. The demand for altered states of consciousness was, Sherratt argued, one of the earliest engines of long-distance human commerce. And the primary delivery mechanism for that demand, across almost every culture on Earth, was smoke. Now go back even further, past agriculture, past trade routes, past the Scythians and the Andean shamans and the sand healers. Go back to a question that researchers are only beginning to take seriously. What were the Neanderthals doing? For most of the 20th century, Neanderthals were dismissed as cognitively primitive, stocky, strong, but incapable of the symbolic thought that defines modern human behavior. Then the evidence began to accumulate against that story. In 2010, a study led by researchers at the University of Bristol analyzed plant remains found in Neanderthal dental calculus, the hardened plaque on their teeth, and found evidence of medicinal plant use. Yarrow, groundsel, ephedra, plants with known analgesic and stimulant properties. In 2018, research led by Juan Luis Arzuaga published analysis suggesting Neanderthals were selecting plants specifically for their chemical properties to treat injury and infection. If Neanderthals were identifying plants by their medicinal effects, the question of whether they noticed the effects of burning those same plants is not a stretch. It is a logical extension of the same cognitive capacity. And then there is a framework that reframes the entire history from the very beginning. In 2000, researcher Robert Dudley of the University of California, Berkeley published what became known as the drunken monkey hypothesis. His argument was that the human attraction to psychoactive substances is not a biological error. It is a biological inheritance. Our primate ancestors evolved in fruit-rich environments where the smell and chemical signature of fermentation, of alcohol produced by ripe and overripe fruit, was a reliable indicator of high-calorie, nutritionally dense food. The attraction to that chemical signal was adaptive. It helped them survive. Subsequent research by molecular biologist Matthew Kerrigan, published in 2015 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, showed that around 10 million years ago, a genetic mutation in our ancestral line dramatically increased the efficiency of the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol, right around the time our ancestors were shifting from tree living to ground living, where fermenting fallen fruit was a primary food source. The capacity to process and even seek out intoxicating chemical signals was selected for. It was written into the genome because it helped the organism survive. Dudley and others have extended this framework to psychoactive plant compounds more broadly. The brain that noticed the burning plant and felt better, felt less pain, felt calmer after a hunt, felt capable of sleeping despite the fear. That brain was more likely to survive, more likely to reproduce, more likely to pass that noticing forward through time to you. This is the architecture beneath all of it, beneath the Scythian ceremony and the Andean pharmacology and the sand healing trance and the Chinese tomb braziers, beneath every pipe ever carved from stone and every ritual ever organized around a burning plant. The human brain did not become drawn to smoke because of weakness or moral failure or cultural corruption. It became drawn to smoke because drawing toward things that make it feel better is what the human brain was built to do. The behavior that became smoking was, at its origin, identical in its neurologic to the behavior of eating when hungry or drinking when thirsty. It was the brain responding to a signal it had learned to trust. And here's the closing truth that makes this entire history land differently than you expected. The modern cigarette was invented in the mid-1800s. Tobacco was introduced to Europe around 1500. The specific history of tobacco and nicotine addiction that dominates the cultural conversation about smoking is roughly 500 years old, but the behavior beneath it, the deliberate inhalation of altered air from a burning plant as a means of changing how you feel, is at minimum 70,000 years old and quite possibly far older than that. The pipe predates civilization, the ritual predates language, the neurological pull predates Homo sapiens. The next time you see someone step outside and light something, or the next time you catch the smell of a fire and feel something in your body shift in a way that is hard to name, you are not witnessing a modern habit. You are witnessing one of the oldest continuous human behaviors on Earth. Something that has been passed forward generation by generation from a cave in South Africa where creatures who were not yet quite you sat in the smoke of a controlled fire and felt without understanding why that something about this mattered. That cave is still there. The smoke has long since cleared, but the signal it sent into the human brain never did.